Ending Life Talk Radio.
Hello, I'm Joy McNaughten. I think the reason you got me here is because I'm mother of Duncan Scott.
Yeah. So just to put the listeners into a bit of context, you actually know one of our colleagues at Indie Live Radio, Fiona, and she had suggested that because of your connection with swimming as a sport, and also your son doing so well at the Olympics, you might want to have a wee chat with us here for The Locker Room, which is our sports show. So what kind of background do you have in relation to the sport of swimming?
Not my favourite sport. Love watching it. The idea of getting wet and getting dried again, it's a no-no for me. I'm land completely. My husband's the one that enjoyed swimming, and actually we have two kids, a son and a daughter, and both of them have thoroughly enjoyed swimming too.
Yeah, it's a sport that in Scotland we seem to be producing over the last few years, certainly since around about the Commonwealth Games of 2014, quite a high calibre of swimmers, getting to, the final events.
We've consistently had very strong swimmers. I can think back to many Olympics where actually it's probably three Scots in a relay of four. So, I mean, if you go back to Rio 2015, exactly that.
Yeah, I must admit, it's not really, I enjoy swimming, always have done, ever since I learned to swim, but it's not really a sport that, I would have followed as such. It was much more a recreation thing for me, as opposed to, sort of taking part in, swim events and races and stuff. So let's just touch on Duncan, I think it is, isn't it? Your son.
Oh.
Yeah. So he did really well at the recent Olympics over there in Japan. How difficult was it for you as a parent, not to be able to go and physically support him?
To be perfectly honest, there are very few major competitions other than those in Europe that we have been able to afford to go to. Right. So there is nothing new for us to not be there, to be honest, We did go to Gold Coast, but that was a really big deal, and we crowdfunded, and a lot of people helped us get there.
Yeah. I suppose that's always going to be an issue, isn't it, for families of athletes, regardless of whether they're swimmers or field athletes. The cost of being able to get to like a major games or a major contest, especially if it's outside of the UK.
Yeah, it's also the cost of the tickets. I think there's an assumption that as a parent you would automatically have a ticket, but you don't. Right. And certainly for the Olympics, we could be guaranteed a ticket, one ticket, but we would still have to pay for that. Yeah. So for somebody like Duncan, who is swimming almost every session, every day, and he could be doing the heats for those too, that really does add up. And on the grounds that you might only have that one ticket, that's quite tricky.
Yeah, I can certainly see that. And obviously, there's a lot of time has to go into, any sporting, activity when you're getting to that sort of elite level. There's a lot of time has to be put in for training and all that kind of stuff. Is it difficult from a parent's point of view to help to keep that support going, or is it just something that you kind of got used to over the years?
You do just get used to it. It's I think I think there's an understanding. It does just sort of take over your life, and then you come out of the bubble at the other end, because they are then in charge of their own, getting to their own competitions and stuff, which makes life very different. But yeah, it is just part of what you do.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking in terms of, let's be honest, if you want to do well in anything, you have to put the work into it, whether it's a sporting activity or an artistic activity or whatever it might be, you have to put in the hard hours, to be able to reap the rewards. And obviously, unless you come from a family where there is absolutely no limit to, the amount of funds that they can provide to help you with that, it makes it a wee bit more difficult, I think, but I could be wrong with that, to be able to get far in the sport.
I think there's quite a considerable number of misconceptions there, because if you were running, you go out, you join a club, and quite a number of clubs will have hardship funds now for those who may not manage. I have one or two queries though. I mean, certainly West District, Scotland's divided into 4 districts for swimming purposes. And certainly when we first joined, if you had been a mum with 2 kids, a single mum with 2 kids, you could turn up for an event, you could be assisting poolside, and your travel would be covered by the district. So in other words, because you were helping out at the side of the pool, for whatever reason that was changed, which isn't ideal. So therefore that can have a restricting effect, because if you've got 2 kids in the pool, you're going to be there anyway. But if you're going to get some help towards the payment of driving out to, for the sake of argument, Dumfries for a competition, then that's pretty useful,
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think you're right, that there is probably a misconception, because certainly from my own personal point of view, I've got really no idea at all, what goes on in the background to help get athletes to wherever it is that they're going to go, whether they're swimmers or runners or whatever it is. It's interesting that you said there, like some of the running clubs and that, they have like hardship funds. That was something that I would never ever have known, unless I was kind of involved with it.
Yeah, I mean, if I were really blunt, both my husband and I attempted, we certainly brought up the question mark of hardship funds and why couldn't it be tied to somebody's tax code or something similar. And there was a huge amount of it was actually very upsetting to see that they couldn't see the benefits for that, because you will have some very, very good kids who, through no fault of their own, won't continue, because there is a cost. There's a cost of joining a club. There's a monthly cost for maintaining club fees. And then if you're going to go to competitions, there's a cost in that as well. Yeah. And some of that cost, depending on the club that you're with, maybe the club will help pay for some of that. But a hardship fund, I mean, frankly, Sport Scotland could be quite firm, but I would be surprised if they will. But and to turn around and say we will give no more funding to this particular sport unless you can state that you've got a hardship fund in place, and those are quite essential. But I mean, maybe it'd be better for us to have our own lottery funding though first.
Well, it's funny you should say that, because I was just going to say that I was reading recently. Although I didn't watch the Olympics, I was reading some articles recently about, the funding from the National Lottery for, athletes and, swimmers, etc., getting there. And I was going to ask you, is it easy or is it quite difficult trying to access that sort of support?
You will have no choice in that. Right. Because if you haven't reached those standards, if you haven't stipulated at the start of a season what your expectations would be by the end of the season, so you've got, for the sake of argument, 10 months to perform, but if you don't perform as you had expected to do, then you're not meeting the expectations that you've set yourself and your coach has set you, and therefore you will not move on to the next stage. You're not putting the effort to reap the rewards. But lottery funding is entirely down to, I mean, all these top, I can only really speak for the swimmers, but the swimmers will have come out and they will have said, this is what I expect to get. If I don't get that, they don't get that, their lottery funding will be removed straight away. And there's no back in between bit. If you're up here in Scotland, you will have, if you're at university, there will be bit of funding from perhaps from your own university. There's also winning students as another form of funding as well. And that's what keeps people in the sport at that stage. But the most difficult stage, I would suggest, is probably when they're 13 to 16, because there's no funding really other than a local council grant of a couple of £100, which would probably pay for an overnight stay.
Right.
Let's be honest, because when you go to a competition, it'll be £5-7 for competition fees, probably more than that now, because it's obviously a while since I've had to deal with them.
Yeah, I mean, I know slightly different sort of events really, but friends, their daughter was doing really well at 10-pin bowling, and she represented Scotland in Fife as a 10-pin bowler. And I know that they found it difficult, funding if they had to go like down to England or whatever for a competition. They very much had to try and find, the funds for that. That's the only real kind of like, not even a personal experience, but close experience that I've ever had in respect of funding. And I had always kind of thought that because the lottery is supposed to be funding, athletes and stuff like that, I just kind of thought that there was this great big pool of money that was got together by the lottery, and then people would just say, right, I'm going to be going to the Commonwealth Games in Australia or whatever it might be, and it's going to cost this amount of money, and it would get allocated to them. But obviously that's not really how it works then.
No, but also, I mean, if they go to the Olympics, it's the British Olympic Authority that will pay for that, and that is completely void of government. It is sponsored. That is fully sponsored.
Right.
And I believe that Team Scotland does exactly the same. Certainly,
right.
You arrive. In fact, I think it was Jack McConnell that set that one up, so that we had funds as opposed to Scotland appearing with bits of kit.
Yeah.
There was a fund available, and that was then provided for. So it's the lottery is you have podium funding and podium potential funding, and the podium potential funding tends to kick in maybe when they're about 16. And there's a limit. You can go online, you can go onto British Swimming / Scottish Swimming, you'll see who's part of those squads and who will get funding. And you will also see that now that the Olympics have taken place, there were athletes who were expected to, who might have been expected to get certain medals, others that they were expected to get into the team. And if they haven't achieved that, then they are very likely to be without any funding at all.
Yeah.
But 60% of all athletes that went to the Olympics, so in other words, 40% had no funding at all.
Right. I mean, that's amazing to me, because as I said, I had this probably an airy-fairy idea that, they were all getting, some sort of financial help. But obviously that wasn't the case. What about sort of like private sponsorship then? I mean, is that a difficult thing for, since we're talking about swimmers to be able to access, sort of like local companies or whatever,
It's very difficult because, frankly, the saddest part and most difficult part is that swimming is not covered by the TV stations.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's the big delight. Somebody, I can't remember his name, unfortunately, but he set up the International Swim League, which will be on, you'll see it streamed in about 2 weeks' time. And anybody who's signed up for the International Swim League will get probably about £15,000, which is hugely helpful towards their living, frankly.
No, absolutely.
Right, that's not just athletes from the UK, that's all over the world. So the great thing about these teams is each team has a roster made up of maybe about 10-15 different nations.
Yeah.
Much more interesting, very speedy.
Yeah, I mean, I've always kind of thought that it's a wee bit strange, that it doesn't kind of get the coverage, on TV, because it can be very exciting, I think, when you're watching
Well,
the
significantly
swimming,
more exciting than watching a sport that takes 90 minutes and maybe nothing happens in the 90 minutes. I mean, I find it really interesting that, and it also takes that 90 minutes might be outside in really wet conditions. Our weather is inclement. Swimming, it can take place, it could be within 21 seconds or 15. 15 is our maximum, and we all get up and go, oh, well, I'll go and get a coffee just now and come back for the final bit, so that's the idea of sitting somewhere and watching something last 90 minutes is...
No, do you know what? I completely agree with you. I mean, I'm a massive football fan, but I do despair, at the kind of money that gets thrown at it when you think of other sports that are, in my opinion, equally as deserving, but for whatever reason.
Well, the other thing is that the other sports are achieving a major things. I got very, very cross at because you will have you'll have Scottish ministers tweeting when the Scottish football teams makes it to the Euros, but we've got European champions in other sports. So there's it's a bit frustrating. You say, why don't you give more page footage to the other sports on the grounds that actually they are achieving? And when people see others achieving, they go and join in. They're up. It's an upbeat factor. It's almost as if it's being suppressed on the grounds that we might suddenly realise we're okay at a variety of things, because actually there's a variety of sports out there where we're hugely good.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit, I thought, the lead up to the Euros, the fact that Scotland had got in there was like way over the top. And as I said, I mean, I'm a great football fan, but I just thought, they're really over the top with this. Yes, it's great that it's the first time that they've done it in a very long time. However, people were going back to the way it was 30 years ago. Oh, we're going to win this tournament. Well, no, I'm sorry, that's not what's going to happen. But I can see from the point of view of people who are taking part in sort of more individual type sports, like swimmers, where there is a greater potential for them to win, the 100 metres breaststroke or whatever the event is within the swimming that they're doing. And certainly, as you say, there probably should be greater support given to that, whether that's from the government or whether it's from some sort of body being, set up to look after it.
Well, what percentage does Scotland make up of the whole of the UK? It's 8% of the UK population. We make up 14% of the British Olympic team, and of the swimming team, we made up 21%.
Right, so that's pretty big then, really, 21%.
We make up 25% of the medals.
Right.
Now, if you don't see it being portrayed, you're not going to realise that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had no idea about that. I can just kind of recall reading somewhere that as a whole, the team got, I think it was at 65 medals or something. There are probably people within that who have won, multiple medals, as your son had done, which possibly, in fact, I think I can honestly say I don't really think I came across much in the way of reporting of his achievement, in getting these medals.
That's the way it is.
Yeah, no, but again, it's such a...
He's the first Olympian to have won 4 medals in one Olympics from British team.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm a wee bit naive, because I don't really know a great deal about, swimming as a sport in that sense. But I don't know. I just kind of think if that had been, like the Scottish football team or the Scottish rugby team, doing something of a similar nature, I mean, it would be everywhere. It would be in all of the papers. It would be on, BBC, STV, all of the TV stations, all of the radio stations. They would all be covering it. But unless you're really into, the sort of, in inverted commas, lesser sports, you're not really going to know about it.
Well, actually, it's not that much of a lesser sport. There are more people that participate in swimming than any other sport in Scotland. So, it depends on how you view lesser sports. And that's the other interesting one as well. I can provide the facts for that one if anybody's wanting it. Participation levels,
Yeah, I mean, I suppose when you think about it, though, I mean, certainly I used to swim a great deal. When I was a kid growing up, I was always in the swimming pool and stuff like that. And it's always a sport that I've taken part in recreationally. But out with of that, I would have known very, very little about it. And it was, in fact, Fiona who posted up a link about, Duncan's medals, that he'd won. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have known about that either. So it's probably, a bit of a fault on my part as well, that maybe I should pay more attention to it. And maybe that's part of the problem as well, not enough of us do pay attention to things other than the, again, in inverted commas, major sports.
Yeah, well, that again is the fault of the media, because actually there are some exceptional Scottish rowers out there. Shona McIntosh is a world champion in shooting. It's vaulters who come from Clackmannanshire. They've been world champions as well. There are millions of sports out there, and we achieve many, many more things. Even at a 16-year-old, I remember going to an awards ceremony to pick up something for dunks, and sitting there with a range of journalists who were all terribly excited about some golfer who'd reached the top 200. And I couldn't contain myself, because it was like, I'm going up to get an award for a 16-year-old who's in the world top 100 as a 16-year-old. And it's the perception of what, and it's entirely down to, without being too cheeky about it, it's an awful lot is down to the media following the money, as opposed to sporting talent. That may be the other way to look at as well.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't disagree with you at all on that. I'm sure that there are lots of people involved in various different sports that are every bit as talented, if not more talented, than people who are making huge amounts of money, because they play for particular football teams or, whatever the case may be. It's just a real disparity, isn't it, in the way that people look at these things.
Yeah, and I think it's probably, there's certainly significant hours put in different sports, different levels, which some couldn't cope with. That's for sure.
Yeah. And again, I think it goes back to that whole thing about the amount of time, that has to be dedicated, to achieve, your sporting goals or your goals in life in general. If you don't put the work in, unless you're incredibly lucky, you're not really going to get to the top. And I've always felt that that's the thing that people should be paying more praise to, is the dedication. Obviously getting awards and medals and things like that's all well and good, but you should be looking behind that, and seeing that these people are putting in a huge amount of work to achieve what they want to achieve.
But it's also interesting to see kids who've been involved with things like athletics and swimming, when it comes to them leaving the sport and perhaps going on to university or looking for a job at some other point in their life, because of the known, it's not just following instructions, it's also about your team building, it's being aware of, your response to criticism, and therefore taking on the criticism and then moving on to the next stage and developing yourself from that. So there are lots and lots of other benefits. It's not just about winning, it's also all those other benefits that develop you as a whole person. So I mean, sport, I would always encourage somebody to be involved in sport. There is a sport out there for anybody, and everyone.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've just recently taken up cycling again, after many years of not doing it. But it's more to do with the health, getting healthier than, wanting to, partake in any competitions or anything like that. But again, as you say, there is something out there for everybody, regardless of, what it is that they're going to do, So going forward then, how many more years would you say Duncan has, you know, I'm loath to say at the top, but, you know, in real competitive action? I mean, has he still got like 10, 15 years or?
It's very, very dependent on him as an individual.
Mm-hmm.
But there are, I mean, it was very interesting actually, this most recent Olympics, there were quite a number in their 30s, which I don't remember remarking on before.
Mm-hmm.
But also, what I do remember making comment on and discovering was that the Commie Games in Glasgow in 2014, of the home nations, I can't say this of any of the other nations, but of the home nations, Scotland had the only swimmers who were born in the 1980s. So we have certainly Scottish swimming has a very good reputation for retention, which, because we're quite a small country, that's incredibly good as well. You know, it's
Mm-hmm.
you don't want to tease somebody off and they leave the sport early. So you know, it'll be interesting to see. I think our women have been hugely encouraged to remain within swimming. They had a project called Project Ailsa, and I think when it came to the European Games, the European Juniors, there was certainly a significant number of girls from Scotland because of Project Ailsa.
Yeah.
But no, so swimming, I fantastic sport to watch. I would so encourage people to go and watch it. And if you've enjoyed it during the Olympics, I would go and watch ISL, which you should manage to see. Last time round, it was definitely on YouTube. And that'll come up 28th, 29th of August. And it's almost every 2 days, certain teams competing against each other. Yeah, those are the ones.
Are they going to like a sort of central place to take part in this, or is it, you know, like Duncan would be like in his local kind of pool?
No, last time round, in November last year, when they did the second one, it was in Budapest, and there's an island in Budapest, which I can't remember the name of offhand, but the pool is on that island, and there were various hotels, and they were basically, all the swimmers landed in this, and it was a bubble. I don't think they'll manage it quite to the same degree, but this one that starts at the end of August, that will be in Naples, and they'll be there and for basically the best part of a month. So
I'll need to keep an eye out for that.
Especially razzmatazz, there's lots of big, you know, to do graphics and stuff. So it is very different. I would recommend somebody going online and looking at that. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But the other thing that you really must have you promoting is national. When you mentioned National Lottery earlier. National Lottery have decided that they will have a prize for the National Lottery Olympian of the Year. So encourage the listeners to go and vote for Dunks on that one, because he is the only Scot that's on that list.
Well, I'll definitely hunt that out and put a vote in there for him, definitely.
Well, it's also he's the only Brit who's won 4 medals in one Olympics. There may be, you know, his total at the moment is 6 medals from an Olympics, which is pretty extraordinary for a 24-year-old.
Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to ask, and I suppose in a way it's a kind of cheeky question maybe. I've always wondered about this duality of, you know, when an athlete competes at the Commonwealth Games, you know, they compete either as, you know, Scotland, England, Wales, whatever. But for the Olympics, they compete as Team GB. Have you ever known anybody who would have not competed at that level because they didn't want to compete under the flag of Team GB?
Flag is irrelevant. It's the competition that's important.
Right.
Yeah. So, but I have to be very honest and say I find the nonsense online absolutely appalling.
Yeah.
The obsession with flag was just ridiculous. If you're competing, you're competing.
Yeah.
I mean, frankly, you know, to get to the Olympics is so much more important than flags.
Just part of the reason for the question as well was I did see quite a bit on it, and admittedly, social media is not the best place, you know, for sort of gathering any kind of information. But there was a real sort of furore across a lot of social media platforms about, Scottish athletes or Welsh athletes shouldn't be taking part, under Team GB, and I kind of agree with yourself in that respect, that surely it's about the competition as opposed to, the body that you're performing under.
But apart from anything else, Scotland is not recognised by the IOC at the moment. So until you're an independent country, you can't do anything other than that. And for the athletes, competing at Olympic level is what matters. The flag is I would imagine, to a greater extent, there will be some to whom it is a great deal more important than others. But if you're a fan of the Olympics, getting to the Olympics is a dash sight more important, which is why of the 35, I think it's 35 athletes that went to the Olympics from Northern Ireland, only 6 of them competed for GB in Northern Ireland, because the rest of them competed for Ireland.
Oh, right. So
competing at the Olympics is definitely more important than flag.
Yeah.
And the reason they're competing for Ireland is because they can get into the team in some respects more easily.
Yeah. I suppose it's a bit like...
I don't want anybody taking offence to that. It's just that is the way it is. But.
Exactly. And it's a bit like... I've always found it a bit strange, especially here in Scotland, where you get footballers who will go and play for the Republic of Ireland because, their grandparents were from the Republic of Ireland, although to all intents and purposes, they're Scottish. And there's always been this kind of backlash against them, they're being traitors to their country and all this kind of thing. But then at the end of the day, when I think about it, I think, do you know what? They probably get a better chance of playing for the Irish national team than they would have possibly playing for, the Scottish national team or even the English national team, When you consider that England has a much bigger pool of sports people to draw from, I
mean, saying that, there are certain... I don't know what the times are to get into the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham next year, but I can certainly remember that for some of the events at Gold Coast, it was tougher to get into the Scottish team than it was to get into the English team, purely simply because of the standard that we have at certain events in Scotland. So it's just...
Is there anything that you can maybe say, to give a wee bit of encouragement maybe to any younger listeners, who are, obviously specifically for swimming because of your son, but is there any kind of words of encouragement that you can give to young people who are looking to get on in any sport?
I should just go and try. The best thing is just going and trying. You won't know what you like until you've tried it. And that's the great thing about lots of different councils will run multi-sports, particularly during the summer months, and that's fantastic. But swimming, to go back to swimming though, you must learn to swim. Doesn't matter who it is, you must learn to swim because it's a life skill. And we have so much water here that you really need to know about water and how to cope with it, Yeah.
No, well, listen.
Vital. Dunks is actually he is the ambassador for the Learn to Swim programme. So I would make sure that anybody does know how to swim. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to have a chat with us.
Thank you.
Pass on my best wishes to Duncan and more power to his swim fins. And I'll definitely keep my eyes open.
ISL coming out, then you've got World Championships in Tokyo, not Tokyo, but in Japan again next year. You've got the Commonwealth Games next year. You've got Europeans next year, so it's a very, very busy schedule.
Yeah. Great.
In life, talk radio.